We interrupt with breaking news. The three white men charged with chasing and killing Ahmaud Arbery are found guilty of murder. I want to walk you through the verdict because it varies for all three men, starting with Travis McMichael. He was found guilty on all charges. As a reminder, this was a 9-count indictment. This means he faces life in prison. Moving on to Greg McMichael, he's found guilty on all charges except the most egregious, which is malice murder. And William R. Bryan was found guilty on all except the two most egregious charges. Again, this means that all three of those men were found guilty of murder. Now, for more analysis, we're going to bring in Bloomberg News legal reporter Erik Larson. He's been reporting on this case, and he also just reported on the Rittenhouse trial, which we'll be discussing too. Erik, thank you for joining us on this breaking news story. Tell me what your biggest takeaway is right now.
You know, my big takeaway from this is that the jury in this case just did not buy the self-defense defense that these three men had put forward. They claimed that Arbery was killed because they had to defend themselves from him, even though they had chased him down in two pickup trucks with two guns while he was unarmed and just running down the streets. That really contrasts with the Kyle Rittenhouse case, of course, that you mentioned. Kyle Rittenhouse found not guilty on all charges last week in shootings at a Black Lives Matter rally in Wisconsin. So he also claimed self-defense. But really, the jury did buy it in that case because the evidence just showed more accurately, I suppose, that he feared for his life. So really, just two very different outcomes with a self-defense defense.
Right. Well, we know that the jury also, I think it was just a couple hours before the verdict came in, asked to rewatch the video. What do you make of that? How big of an impact do you think that had on the outcome here?
You know, honestly, when we put out a short story on them rewatching those videos, I really wasn't sure which way they were leaning, just based on that, because, you know, really the video was used by both the defense and the prosecution to make their cases. So it was really kind of unclear. But we did see that the state used the video very effectively to show just really that Arbery was an unarmed man running down the street. And you could see over and over in these videos these three men coming at him with two trucks with guns. And it just really was very clear sort of what would happen in those minutes.
Yeah. And I know I also want to mention that it wasn't until the video of Ahmaud Arbery's murder came out to the public that these charges were filed. I'm curious. And also, I should mention, we are looking at live pictures on the ground in Brunswick, Georgia, from reaction of protesters and individuals who were watching for this verdict throughout the day and throughout this entire trial. Erik, going back to you, I know you just covered the Rittenhouse trial, and you mentioned that a little bit. What do you make of the very different verdicts here? Do you attribute that mainly to the self-defense argument, or is there something else going on here?
No, I absolutely do attribute that to the self-defense argument because, you know, regardless of what someone thinks about what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the video that was shown at that trial did show Rittenhouse, you know, on the ground, in the streets, sort of surrounded by people who were chasing him. They did not appreciate his presence there, especially armed. You know, you could debate all day whether or not he should have been there at that protest at all with that AR-15 style weapon, which obviously would be intimidating to a lot of people there, especially in the world of mass shootings we live in. But the video just at the end of the day showed him surrounded by people who were trying to attack him, essentially, is the way they presented it to the jury. It was a very chaotic situation, and he feared for his life. Of course, Rittenhouse broke down on the witness stand, testifying in his own defense, talking about how scared he was. You know, and in this case in Georgia, Mr. Arbery did not pose that same kind of threat. He was not chasing those three men. They were chasing him in two trucks. And, you know, those aggravated assault counts included assault with that truck, that they pinned him in and trapped him.
Right.
And tried to carry out what they later described as a citizen's arrest.
Right. I want to go back to the specificity of the verdicts here because they are different for all three of the men involved. What do you make of that? Did that surprise you?
You know, it didn't actually surprise me too much because we really did see that even though they were all charged with the same 9 counts, and the state argued that they were all guilty on all of them, they really did leave some wiggle room there for the jury to consider different weights of responsibility in a way. I mean, we never know. We can't get into the heads of the jurors. We weren't in their deliberations. Sure. But clearly, Travis McMichael, he's the one who pulled the trigger. He fired 3 shots from that shotgun and killed Mr. Arbery. So it's not too much. It's not as surprising that he would be found guilty of malice murder. That's the count 1, whereas the other 2 men, his father and their neighbor, were found not guilty. So even there are several other murder counts. There's felony murders, which would be murders that deaths that resulted while carrying out felonies of aggravated assault. So it's a little complex. They were all found guilty of murder charges, but it was really Travis McMichael who was found guilty of the most severe one here.
I also want to look ahead with you because obviously the state trial just finished outside of sentencing, but the hate crimes trial begins in February. How could today's verdict play into that, if at all?
You know, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure. You would know that the judge in that case is going to want to say that this has no bearing whatsoever. He'll want jurors, when it gets to trial, to have to really not take this into account at all. That's always the challenge facing judges and juries in any case. But in a case that's this high profile and in which this federal case will be happening after this one, which, many, many people will be hearing about, the defense teams will probably argue, that there's some sort of, that the jury's been tainted in some way by all of this media attention and news. It's totally unclear how far that might get them in court in their defense. But they're going to have a hard time, I'm sure, finding a jury that will be totally unbiased. Not a hard time, but they're going to have to be very careful doing that.
I do want to mention a little part of a statement that we just got from Senator Warnock down in Georgia. He said, "True justice looks like a young black man not having to worry about being harmed or killed while on a jog, while sleeping in his bed, while living what should be a very long life." And he added, Ahmaud should be with us today. Going back to you, Erik, when do we expect to hear more on the sentencing here?
I don't know. The judge hasn't set a date yet. I imagine it will happen somewhat quickly. That's going to be the next, real thing to watch here, because the judge does have some leeway on that malice murder charge. They did not seek the death penalty. The state didn't seek the death penalty, so that's not an option. But life, he does face life behind bars, and the judge, the law does say that the judge has some ability to offer a chance of parole down the road, but he'd have to serve 30 years first. So it remains to be seen whether the judge will do anything there. But yeah, there's going to be a range here. All of the men face potentially decades behind bars, if not life, for Travis McMichael.
Yeah. Looking at the verdict for William Robbie Bryan, who was found guilty on all counts except for those 2 most egregious, what does the timeline look like for him in terms of prison time?
To be honest, I haven't calculated that up yet. I'm not.
Fair enough.
I'm not quite sure, so I don't want to give you any inaccurate information. But definitely, he's in a better position here. And you asked earlier about whether or not any of this was surprising, and in particular, him getting off a little bit more easy here is not too surprising, because as his defense team said at trial and in their closing statements, he didn't have a gun. He was actually the one who filmed the video that became the central piece of evidence. He was filming from his phone in his front seat. Yes, the jury found that he used his car to block Arbery, and that helped result in his death. Right. But he wasn't one of the main aggressors, it seems, in the eyes of the jury here.
Yeah. Erik, and my final question to you, I know that you just mentioned the video evidence. To what extent did that evidence play into the verdict? I know we already talked about how the jury requested to review the video evidence before deciding on that final verdict. But, and again, I know you just covered the Rittenhouse trial and you cover these news events all the time. To what extent do you feel that the video evidence really is making an impact on these verdicts?
It is. I don't even think it can be overstated how important the video evidence is in cases like this. And I think it's been said, over and over again, how a lot of these cases that have become central to the Black Lives Matter movement have really gained so much attention only because of the evidence. In a sense, you've heard a lot of people say, the only reason people, believe that this kind of thing happens now is because they have to look at the video and see it. Of course, that horrible video of George Floyd being murdered in Minneapolis is sort of, an example of that. So the video evidence is just so crucial here. It's hard to watch for the jurors. I'm sure they had to watch it over and over again. That final image of Mr. Arbery trying to sort of jog away and then collapsing onto the ground. So it's hard to say what might have happened in this case if there had been no video footage. We'll never know. But certainly a lot of things like this have probably happened where cameras weren't around.
Of course. Well, Erik, really appreciate you joining us to give us all of the context on this breaking news. And I should mention that we're going to continue to have live picture from the ground in Brunswick, Georgia, as we continue to follow and cover the aftermath of this verdict right here on Quicktake. Again, that was Bloomberg News legal reporter Erik Larson. Thanks for joining us. Follow us on all Quicktake social platforms on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram for more developing news. Thank you so much.